Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to the Alpine Mountain Zoo, where today we're going to be adding two new species, one into the zoo and one into the patch of forest next to the entrance, and that's where we're going to begin. Our main task today is to build a habitat for the dhole in the Himalayan pass, which we've never used before. Very excited for that. But before we get onto that, something we did in a previous zoo a long time ago, which I really enjoyed, was having free-roaming deer in a park next to the zoo. I really enjoyed that back in Tecton Zoo, but there was one issue with it. The park was absolutely miles away from the zoo, so you never saw them. I thought it'd be cool, seeing as we're in the Alps here, to have some red deer just wandering wild around the little patch of forest next to the entrance, so that just occasionally you might see them when you're in the zoo, near the raccoon habitat or by the entrance. So that's what we're doing here. I've added some more trees in to thicken up the forest here, and then we're going to start laying knoll barriers around the area to keep the animals contained. Got a bit of a trade-off here. I'd like this area to be absolutely massive, so it's really kind of random whether you see the deer or not, so they're not always there. But if I make the habitat too big, then the keepers will basically be in there permanently cleaning the habitat, and I don't really want to see the keepers in here. So we're going to compromise. I think it's about 4,000 square meters in the end, which is about the limit of the habitats being manageable really by one keeper. So this would not be part of the zoo, so all the kind of infrastructure to make this habitat work in the game, like the gates and the paths, will be hidden. We'll have the gate hidden away behind some foliage, use the invisible paths. We'll need to get a keeper in here. I know we're in sandbox mode, but I've got most of the options turned on for this. All I've got turned off, I think, is the animal space requirements, so we can build more realistic habitats, and the zoo's finances, so we could spend lots of money building the entrance, rather than having to get habitats in here first. We'll add the basics in here, some water for the animals, which will hide into our little weenie on the top of this hill, and then some food and the Scots pine scratching tree, because that fits in nicely to this area anyway. And even though it can't be seen, I couldn't resist adding in some water damage to that wall there. We'll put in a few of just the basic feeders down here. We want them nice and flat so they can't be seen, and then we'll put that enrichment item in as well. And then the most important thing is we will go into the settings and disable escapes, so our deer are going to stay within those knoll barriers. And that's all we need to do. If we take a look at it, it's so good to see deer just walking past the entrance. The stag in particular looks majestic in this forest. And like I say, if you're lucky, you might even see the deer when you're in the zoo, like just behind the raccoon habitat here. Love that little addition. Let's move on to the main course, so to speak, which is the habitat for the dhole. Back in the Himalayan pass for this, our first ever dhole habitat, and the first thing to work out is exactly where it's going to go. So the highlighted box here is the minimum space requirement that we need for them, and what I want to work out is where the habitat's going to sit so that it can be seen through the two main viewing areas for it. The first one is at the end of the streets that we built next to the honey badger, and then the second one will be in the middle of the main temple building. So if we head down to the first viewing area here, we want to make sure that the habitat extends to the left as well as to the right of this, so that the dholes are going to be crisscrossing in front of this viewing window. We also want to make sure that we can see them well. So we've got a little human for scale here. We'll sink them down to dhole height, get them about as far away as we'd ever want them to be, and then we will reshape the habitat to fit that. Just marking it out with sand so we know where the barriers are going to go. The barriers that we'll be using will be a mixture of glass for the viewing areas and then custom fences for the rest of the habitat. So we're going to run some glass across this first viewing area here, and then we'll just make sure it's in exactly the right position next to this little bit of concrete that's covering up the end of the path. According to the animal care manual for the dhole, it requires a minimum of 2.4 meters of fence height, incorporating an overhang of at least 60 centimeters. These guys are really good climbers. In fact, by canine standards, they are seriously good climbers. Some dholes live up in the Himalayas, which is why they are in this part of the zoo, and they are very adept at climbing, finding tiny little toe holds in the mountain rocks, and a chain link fence would certainly not keep them in without an overhang, which is why we're going to build a custom fence. This area here is where the second viewing window is going to be, and that's going to be an extension to the big temple building, which we will build later on in the episode. So I've got all the fences to the correct height. We'll add our keeper gate in. We're going to have a fairly extensive offstage area here. But let's move on now to the anti-climb barriers. Unfortunately, the anti-climb barrier on the chain link fences in the game is really poor. It's absolutely tiny. I wouldn't stop anything climbing over it. So we'll make our own anti-climb barrier. And seeing as we're going to have to make an anti-climb barrier and attach it to every single panel of fence. We might as well make custom fence posts as well, just to make everything a bit more attractive and a bit more original. I'm not basing this fence on any particular fence from real life, just want something simple that's going to meld away into the background, be the right height, and have the correct anti-climb barrier on it. So we'll just make one of these posts, and then we'll put a thinner one across the top to hold up the rest of the mesh. We've already got the chain link fences in here because the mesh on these looks better than the mesh pieces, and you get those extra wires in there, which I like the look of as well. So the only mesh that we need to put in is the mesh that's going to form the anti-climb barriers. So we use the smallest piece of mesh, get that correctly lined up with all the different posts, and then we'll duplicate that so it fills in the space, and then we can just copy it across the whole fence panel. I'm so glad Frontier fixed the LODs on the mesh, the way that you can actually see the mesh from far away now. Massive improvement on how it used to work. The final thing that we'll do for it is just put a concrete base in the bottom. Dholes are good at digging as well as climbing, so you'd need concrete running underground below the fence to stop them from digging their way out. So we'll just use a couple of these plaster trim pieces, and that's the fence completed. Now all we need to do is place it around the entire habitat, rotating it in 2 axes for each piece that we place down to get it precisely lined up. It is a massive pain to do, but it looks really good when it's finished. If we come in and just take a look at how the habitat's shaping up, straight away it's just got that slightly more original look without a basic in-game fence in there. Could do with a little bit of foliage, so we'll add that in. And there we go, habitat's starting to come along nicely. I want to put a bit more effort than usual into the off-show area here, so we're going to build a space for the keeper to get into the habitat and some kennels for the dhole as well. If you're enjoying this, by the way, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel out if you do that. So what are we doing here? Any carnivore habitat really should have a kind of airlock system like this where you've got a double door in case one of the animals gets through the main door while you're in there. So we'll dress this up with some buckets for food, security lights, and a little clipboard so the keepers can record when they've been fed and things like that. And then we'll put some kennels in. So we're going to have 3 of these. We'll make it look like there's access to them from directly inside the habitat for the animals, and then a second access for keepers on the other side. We're going to have a pair of dholes in here to begin with, but hopefully soon we will have some little pups. So we'll build 3 of these just to kind of future-proof it. I imagine the majority of the pups will be moved on to other zoos when they grow up. That's the first one done. We'll duplicate this a couple of times and then we'll cover all of them in decals to make them look more realistic. Almost forgot to build the doors for the animals, so using some of the actual door pieces we'll make some little implied hatches here so the dholes can get in and out of their kennels. And then we'll move on to the main feature of the habitat, which is based around one of my favourite enrichment items, the beaver pool. This item deforms the ground when we place it down, so we'll cover it up with paths to prevent that from happening. And what we're going to do is use this to create the beginnings of a little waterfall that goes down into the water body that you can see there. And that way the dholes will jump in here and splash around and have fun, but it'll also form a pretty backdrop for the habitat and give us something to begin a waterfall with, which will then cascade down into the main body of water. We'll set it into its surroundings with some terrain painting. We'll get some wet looking mud around the main entrance and exit point, and then some grass around it. And then we'll put some enrichment items in various places to make sure that the dholes are going to crisscross this habitat. We'll flatten the terrain here so that this bamboo doesn't go walkies every time you place it down. There we go, it stopped. And then we're going to use rockwork to tie together the beaver pool and the water feature. You may have noticed that this episode is slightly shorter than normal. I apologise for that, but there is a good reason for it. There was supposed to be 3 things in this episode, as well as the deer and the dhole. The first thing I worked on was getting guests up into the overlook in the zoo's entrance. That's something that's been on my mind since episode 1, and one of you guys made a really good suggestion in the comments, I think for that episode, saying why don't we turn it into an animal encounter? So that the guests will actually go up there. So the reason we need to do something like that is that the beautiful custom staircases that we built, we can't put paths into those. They will completely ruin the look of the entire entrance. But by turning it into an animal encounter, it means guests will use any available surface to walk on, and they'd actually get up the stairs and into the building. So I spent a very long time cutting holes into the building, building open custom doors so that the guests could walk through them and get up there, filling the balcony with all sorts of graphics, habitat signs, and memorial plaques so that the guests had a reason to go up there to read them, and then just changing pieces and surfaces more times than I could count so that the guests would actually walk up them. And eventually I got it so that the guests would walk up those stairs, but after about 30 minutes of watching it on triple speed, precisely one guest actually made it to the top and went into the building, and they immediately just turned around and left again. Nobody went up onto the balcony, and eventually after quite a few hours I had to admit defeat, which is not something that we do very often on this channel, but I just could not get it to work. And because the guests weren't going up the stairs, what I ended up with was just loads of guests milling around the stairs at the bottom of the entrance, going nowhere. It did not look good, and in the end I just had to delete everything and give up. And unfortunately that ate into some of the time that I'd set aside for this episode. I didn't have time to do the interior for the big temple building where the viewing gallery is going to go, so we had less things to do in the episode, hence why it's running a little short, so apologies for that. Normal service will resume next week. All that being said, this waterfall's starting to look really nice now. I'm really pleased with this. We're going to hide the special effects pieces with some of the rocks and this log here, because there's only one visible special effects piece. Really easy to do that with that log. And then we'll place some of our old friend, the medium buffalo grass, just to sit it into the surrounding landscape. We'll sink the buffalo grass down as always, and then we'll take a look at it. And that is one good looking waterfall, I think, especially as the dhole are going to both play around in the top part of it and swim in the bottom part of it. I think that's going to be a really nice addition to the habitat. We've got a lot of fairly subtle terrain changes in the habitat, so what we're going to do is use rocks to fill those in, which gives it a more realistic look. Just using one rock with random rotation, we'll fill in anywhere that looks like it needs filling in. And that's the basics of the habitat done. Looks pretty good. Let's do some terrain painting. There we go, that starts to bring it together. And then finally, of course, we'll add the buffalo grass. Love natural looking habitats like this. Let's move on now to the viewing gallery so the guests can actually see into it. As we discussed last week, this building is going to extend backwards to incorporate the tower that you see behind it and the two circular viewing galleries that look down into the nilgai and the bear habitats. So we're going to begin the process of extending it now. On the back side of this building, we're just going to use the plain limestone panels. We're not going to use the stones at 1,200 pieces per panel. They're kind of pricey, so we'll avoid those for this back part of the building because the guests won't be able to see this from anywhere. And once we've got that filled in, we're going to build a viewing gallery that will extend out of the wall that we just built and look into the habitat so that the guests are right next to the pool and we'll get a completely different view than they do from the first viewing area. This design is based on what I assume is a balcony on the real temple, so it's not at ground level, but it does a good job at ground level here, just using a few of the Indian pieces and then the same corrugated roof that we've used for the main part of the building. I've designed this so it sticks out of the building so that it takes guests off the main path through the building if they want to stop and look at the dhole, so it doesn't create any congestion. And once we've got that to the right size, we'll move it back into the wall that we've just built, and then we'll surround it with some more walls to make sure that the dhole can't get up here either. This is the wall from the honey badger habitat. I like the wood at the top. We'll need to get rid of those stones though, because I reckon the dholes would happily climb those. So we'll just leave it as plain limestone when it's finished, and then we'll add the anti-climb barrier to the top of it as well to make sure they can't get out. And then we'll punch a hole in the wall and then fill it in with some more limestone panels so it sits nicely into the interior of this building. I'm enjoying how much this looks exactly like the classic Reddit post about your plants growing through the walls in Planet Zoo, but that will of course be fixed once we put the interior in. And there we go, that's the viewing gallery in. View is looking good. We'll just drop one more internal wall in so we can start getting the structure of this building done. And that's everything completed. Let's take a look at it. Here's the first viewing area down the little Asian street that we've built. And here's the dhole. They are really gorgeous. Let's see what they make of their new water feature. They certainly seem to be enjoying it, and for once the Himalayan birch in the beaver pool actually fits the habitat that we're building it in as well, which is good. Himalayan pass is coming along really nicely now. That is our fourth habitat in here. Let's check out what it looked like at the start of the episode. And this is what it looks like now. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thank you especially to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to see your name up here. And I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.